Since 2017, I'm very proud to be associated with BirdLife South Africa as the HR manager. Some of my fellow colleagues will also in future present talks on this platform about the work we are doing to conserve birds and also their habitats. However, the topic of tonight's talk stems from my PhD research and previous association with the University of the Free State Centre for Gender and Africa Studies, but also the Department of Zoology and Entomology, where I used to work. So I became very envious of my colleagues departing for the Okavango each year. And when I accidentally came to learn about Indigenous knowledge systems, after completing my master's degree, I realized the potential to explore it within the empirical context of the Okavango Panhandle. And of course, it also meant a seat on this boat. Little did I know, my sense for adventure demanded I produce a 300-odd-page thesis as evidence that, in fact, the adventure was actually a massive and rather complex research project, which almost consumed my existence for a couple of years. However, it held reward beyond measure and made me fall in love deeply with this magical place and its people. And I'm very excited to share with you a glimpse of my experience tonight. So thank each and every one of you for joining. And also, please feel free to contact me afterwards. My email address is on the screen here, should you have additional questions. During the talk, I will provide a little bit of a background about the region. I will touch on some deep time or the geological processes responsible for the formation of the delta. I will briefly introduce you to the indigenous people of the Panhandle, as well as the indigenous knowledge systems, or IKS in short, but also the associated values set to inform their relationship with the natural environment, especially in relation to the conservation status of the larger bioregion. And finally, look at some of the threats the region and its people are facing. In 2012, when I first arrived at Leseding Research Camp next to the Samochima village, but also in close proximity to Shakawe and the Namibian border at Mohembu, I was struck first by the extreme contrasts of not only the environment, where there is this magnificent water body absolutely teeming with life amidst the Kalahari desert, but also the contrast in the existence of the people of the Panhandle, or what is described typically as the haves and the have-nots. Valuable riverfront properties in the Samochima area are mostly owned by individuals and tourism operators, and the villages further inland with only a few corridors gaining them access to the river. There are no electricity or sanitation in the villages, and water points sometimes shared with cattle and donkeys. Alternatively, water for household use needs to be collected from the river, and believe me, there are plenty of crocodiles around. If you do not have access, or then very limited access to the cash economy, you are sometimes solely reliant on the immediate natural environment to provide food, shelter, and other necessary means. In a sense, the natural environment becomes your teacher, your pharmacy, your pantry, your hardware store. It informs your belief system and aids your rituals. It is the playground, the cultural frame of stories, music, and art. As such, it provides for an intimate knowledge about your immediate natural environment, obtained through experience, but informed also by the tried and trusted knowledge passed along by your elders. However, we live in a fast-changing world, resulting in a hybrid fusion of complexity and numerous paradoxes, the typical ambivalence of being caught between opposing forces of continuity and change. Before I continue, also in line with the character and ethics associated with IKS, I need to state my positionality. As Ruan mentioned, I'm a white Afrikaans-speaking woman who grew up on a farm in the Verkeerdevlei district, an almost rural village in the Free State Province, South Africa, brought up in the Christian faith. In order to provide agency to the indigenous people, an enabling research methodology was developed, allocating them a voice to speak way louder than my own. I have a working knowledge of Sesotho and Setswana, but I relied heavily on Olibogeng in the top left picture there to act as my interpreter and guide, as she is Hamakush from the Samochima village and I'm forever indebted to her for sharing a wealth of knowledge. Now, as we all know, the Okavango Delta is a massive endorheic wetland amidst the Kalahari Desert in the far northwestern corner of Botswana and part of what is known as Ngami land. The drainage basin is shared between three sovereign countries, Angola, Namibia, and Botswana. And as a result of the earlier carving up of this continent during the scramble for Africa, which is cause for interesting geopolitical dynamics, especially regarding the conservation status, but also the economic resource potential of this water body. Whatever activities are happening upstream will most surely influence the nutrient balance and other dynamic system properties downstream, affecting the overall biodiversity of the bioregion and also the well-being of the indigenous people. The Okavango River initially flows from the highlands of Angola, from where the streams converge into the Kwitu and the Okavango rivers. Passing through Namibia, the Okavango enters Botswana as the Okavango River into the section known as the Panhandle. The Okavango River eventually divides into three separate rivers to finally disperse of its water in a massive alluvial fan, disappearing into the sandy Kalahari Basin. The endorheic drainage of the Okavango River is linked to two major parallel fault lines. The Kumari Fault at the northern edge of the delta along the line of the Cylinder Spillway is responsible for the low depression spread into the alluvial fan, whilst the Tamalakane and Kunyene faults at the lower extremity of the delta, passing through Maan, are responsible for the containment. The tectonic shifts, which happens frequently in the area, continues to shape the delta, and even tiny shifts can have a significant effect on the flow and distribution of water in such an otherwise flat area. Rubich and McCarthy also predicts that over time, and we're talking geological time, the system will eventually join the Zambezi system. Aside from the located tectonic activity, rifting as a result of the superswell makes the delta the southernmost tip of the East African Rift Valley. The seismic activity happened about 2.5 million years ago, but the delta as we see it now, bounded by the Tamalakane Fault, might only be 120,000 years old, or must I say young, because large areas of alluvial deposits have been discovered to the south and also east of its present extent, which is evidence that water flowed previously far beyond the current limits of the delta's fan. The delta consists of a multitude of main channels, smaller tributaries and lagoons, as well as floodplains, islands, and mainland areas. The water courses are always changing due to annual flooding, as well as a combination of sediment transport, the mentioned seismic activity, the construction of termite mounds, which over time, around them, the subsequent formation of islands, the continual opening of new channels by hippopotami, and also the closing of others by moving papyrus beds or vegetation growth. And in the right top photo there, you can actually see the movement of the papyrus beds, almost like earrings on a tree. The Okavango Panhandle in Delta is an almost unspoiled wilderness, or we would like to think so, and a sought-after tourist destination. The tourism sector, pre-COVID of course, was the second largest contributor to Botswana's GDP, next to the diamond industry. The Delta, of course, obtained World Heritage status in 2014 and is in close proximity to Tsodilo Hills, maybe lesser known, but also a World Heritage site and equally impressive. Aside from the World Heritage status, the Delta is also a Ramsar site or a wetland of international importance, with various management plans aiding the conservation status of the bioregion. The area is still regarded as ecologically pristine, or then supposedly free from anthropogenic influence, but there are human settlement of indigenous and other groups of people in and around the entire Panhandle and Delta. Overall, the Delta sustains around 130,000 people and counting. Despite its scenic beauty, the area has never been an easy place to live. In earlier times, the wide, waterless areas of the central Kalahari resulted in the area being isolated from the rest of Bechuanaland, as Botswana was known previously. The prevalence of tsetse flies further complicated habitation of the area, forming a disease barrier. Today, Veterinary cordon fences and the southern and northern buffalo fence are meant to contain the unrestricted migration of wildlife from in and around the delta to the areas important for commercial cattle farming around Ganzi or the Central District, all in an effort to limit the spread of foot and mouth disease with various checkpoints en route to and from Ngami land. So, who are the indigenous people then of the Panhandle and the Delta? Until about 1750, Ngami land was occupied mainly by nomadic late Stone Age hunter-gatherers only. There is still a dynamic presence of various San groups in the region. Tsodilo Hills was inhabited much earlier, dating back to the 600s, with rich rock art paintings as evidence. Tsodilo Hills is also a sacred space in indigenous cosmologies, and according to folklore, known as the place where the Creator descended from the heavens, with his footprints still visible. And if you do find yourself in the area, please do visit. It's an absolutely amazing experience, even if it takes all day and requires some serious climbing. From 1800 onwards, the Wayai and the Hambakush started settling in the area. The Wayai is concentrated on the northern side of the Panhandle, mostly around Seronga, and the Hambakush then on the southern side, with a concentrated influx of Hambakush refugees during the around 1967 as a result of Angola's war for independence. There are also smaller concentrations of Herero people alongside the Delta, who also fled colonial rule in Namibia. The Hambakush people was renowned as rainmakers and held in high regard, almost feared due to this powerful ability. This ritual known as Mzeze is said to have involved child sacrifice and is no longer practiced. Chief Disho, the last rainmaking chief from the Hambakush, stayed in Chakawe until 1969, according to Larson. The Hambakush is also skilled basket weavers, potters, artisans, and fishermen. Interesting to mention that a local Hambakush Gorsti or Hetman then, during a conservation agriculture workshop in 2013 hosted at Leseding, questioned whether the sanctioning of Mzeze is not to blame for the prolonged droughts that they were suffering at the time, illustrating how deeply rooted indigenous beliefs are. The protection of minority rights does not feature strongly in modern-day Botswana, and through what Solway describes as Tswanification, there is a hegemonic assimilation of minority cultures into the dominant Tswana culture. English is recognized as the official language and Setswana the national language. As such, when referring to indigenous peoples, it bears reference on all these ethnic groupings. Despite the assimilation, though, the informal social hierarchy has the San people firmly at the bottom, and they are referred to as Basarwa, or people without cattle. Cattle ownership, of course, has significant cultural importance amongst indigenous peoples as a display of wealth, but also as social capital in transactions such as Bukhari or bride price and other rituals. Bukhari is known as Labola. Unfortunately, free-roaming cattle, goats, and also large numbers of donkeys used as draft animals to plow fields or to carry water from the river are having significant ecological impact on the sensitive sandveld and floodplains. The assimilation and subsequent hybridization of culture in Ngami land started earlier, especially under the reign of the powerful rebel Khosi or Hetman Sekgoma of the Tawana, where his chieftaincy settled initially close to Lake Ngami, but during a severe drought that saw Lake Ngami dry up during 1886, and Sekgoma moved to Chief's Island in the middle of the Delta, where he established the Merafe. The rinderpest, which spread through Africa also during the late 1800s, temporarily cleared the Delta almost from tsetse fly infestations, making it easier also to settle in the area. During Sekgoma's reign, for the sake of the ivory trade, elephants were hunted close to extinction. Today, the massive concentration of elephants in the area may be a popular tourist attraction, but is also cause for severe human-wildlife conflict and also having devastating impact on the environment, as can be seen from the image on the left. Today, also as in earlier times, indigenous groups of the Panhandle sustain themselves mainly through subsistence farming, such as keeping livestock and growing rain-fed crops such as millet and beans, which is mainly their staple, fishing, but also through the sale of baskets, curies, and other informal cash enterprises. Until recently, there was a complete ban on hunting in Botswana, which included subsistence hunting. So we've touched a little on the activities which forms part of the knowledge ecology of the region, but on a theoretical level, what is Indigenous knowledge, or IK? IK consists of a holistic combination of two constructs, namely indigeneity and then knowledge. Indigeneity refers to a specific bioregion or a locality, for instance, the Panhandle. The knowledge component refers to its concentrated knowledge about the natural, the social, the technological, and cosmological spheres as part of an all-inclusive system of knowledge. If one look closer, each of these larger knowledge components, for instance, the natural sphere, as illustrated here, contains various other knowledge components informing the overall knowledge system. There is a seasonal rhythm to IKS, a definite division of labor. It carries metaphysical importance, and as was mentioned earlier, informs the cosmology and belief systems of the custodian, also represented in arts and crafts, and this knowledge is sometimes intuitive, it's heuristic or reflective, but always as a result of close and intimate interaction with nature and the natural environment. This intimate, interactive knowledge of the bioregion and its resources ensure the survival of its custodians and practitioners, first unsupported by any modern alternatives. Of course, IKS with dynamic system components, just like the Delta, are continuously evolving. Some elements of IKS are maintained, some became redundant and calcified due to the availability of easier alternatives. For instance, the use of plastic containers instead of clay pots. In a fast-changing cultural landscape, others were sanctioned, for instance, the rainmaking rituals. Others became hybridized, and some transformed into enterprise. For some, more sustainable solutions are required. Considering the environmental crisis and the importance to conserve our natural resources, sourcing crucial means in escalating demand from the immediate natural environment is simply not sustainable. In theory, IKS is regarded to foster an interconnected, long-standing, deep, and intimate understanding of the natural world, informed by a value system which can be described as an ecosophy or then ecological philosophy, comprising a system of egalitarian and reciprocal values. These values link closely with Arne Nass's theory of deep ecology, advocating equal intrinsic value for all life forms. Obviously, I feel it needs to accent abiotic forms as well as part of critical deep ecology. Humans are thus situated within nature, not outside or in charge of nature, entitled to exploit its resources in a linear fashion. There seems to be an adverse shift in the values that initially informed IKS, maybe also as a result of finding yourself on the have-not side of things. With the natural environment reduced to a mere resource, it highlights the complexity of the urgent need to commit to sustainable alternatives and conservation in an adverse socio-political economy. The Panhandle, unfortunately, is also suffering related symptoms of the Anthropocene, such as climate change, prolonged droughts, rampant fires, scorching temperatures. Food security is an ongoing concern. In addition, poor soil quality, human-wildlife conflict, high unemployment, the prevalence of HIV, poor service delivery in smaller villages are all posing a challenge to the well-being and the survival of the people, but also the biodiversity. Babelela Trust is an NGO long situated in Samochima and is continuously looking for sustainable solutions to both food security as well as the environmental impact associated with living off the land, and is making a notable difference. In paradoxical ambivalence, despite the rural character of surrounding villages such as Samochima, Shakawe seems to be bursting at its seams, maybe alarmingly so. In comparison to when I first visited the area in 2012, it has since acquired a new shopping mall, a large secondary school and hostel, multiple housing projects are underway, a hospital was being built, and you can even now buy fast food, unfortunately, with the associated plastic pollution very visible. And you can even now catch a minibus taxi. I last visited the area early in 2020 and can't wait to get back. There is also a massive construction underway to build a bridge across the Okavango River at Muhembu with the help of associated activity. Previously, it was only possible to cross the river via a ferry service operated daily and free of charge by the Botswana government. As is the case with most of the development projects and also the tourism industry, it is facilitated by international stakeholders and provides little to no employment opportunity for the locals. Following independence in 1966, Botswana saw a rapid change in its economy and became the world's fastest growing economy for a number of years, mainly due to the discovery of rich diamond resources. And of course, it's a finite resource. In an effort to diversify its dependence on this resource, as was mentioned earlier, the tourism industry surpassed the beef industry and became a strong focus point, and all the more important to conserve the natural assets securing this trade. Unfortunately, both these leading sectors of Botswana's macroeconomy were hit hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. No surprise then that President Masisi, recently after investing in Africa Mining Indaba, announced Botswana's intent to intensify efforts to attack non-diamond exploration, with several active exploration projects and mining licenses to be issued to private companies. This announcement is adding to the concerns about Recon Africa's alleged intent for oil and gas exploration and potential production in the larger Okavango region, which is in very close proximity of the Okavango Delta. Considering this, the accelerated development in Shakawe and Muhembu becomes even more alarming. Unfortunately, this narrative is very similar to the one surrounding the Gahu diamond mine, situated also in a protected area, namely the Central Kalahari Game Reserve. Despite controversy and high-profile litigation, in 2014, this mine, which also expanded ancestral land of the San, became operational. The mine was first known as the Gopi Mine until acquired by Gem Diamonds, a British-based global mining company. During this controversy, it was stressed that the country's natural resources belong to Botswana and it has the right to utilize those resources as it sees fit. With symptoms of the Anthropocene threatening biodiversity loss and also the well-being of the indigenous people, alongside rapid development and possible drilling and fracking now a reality, I passionately hope the conservation condition can help withstand all threats so that the Okavango Panhandle and Delta can remain the magical biodiversity-rich anomaly it is. And also for the indigenous people to foster and even rekindle their reciprocal bond with nature and to treasure their privileged legacy, call this place home. Thank you very much. I would like to acknowledge the following people on the screen and also for everybody that listened to tonight's talk. And yeah, let's hope the conservation condition can withstand.
Well, I wish I knew more about this area and what you've shared with us tonight. I can see that your studies was really in depth, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with us tonight. And I'm sure there's people who would like to ask questions about what they know and what they have experienced. So from all of us, we appreciate your time, your trouble, and your presentation was so short you could have spent more time to find your share screen.
I was so scared to go over the time. I decided to limit it. So yeah.
No, we pushed you too hard. Sorry, you could have said much more. Okay. Questions and answers to Ruan, you and Paul and Rod can handle that. And you can either raise your hand electronically or just show your hand and then ask your questions. Thank you very much.
Maybe if I may kick off the question and answer session, Isabel, you mentioned a reciprocal bond between humans and nature. Now, in the Okavango, well, in Botswana has what, 2.2 million people for a population. How do we mend that reciprocal bond between humans and nature worldwide? I mean, close to 7 billion people? How do we take the indigenous knowledge that what I believe, and I hope we all do, that's inherent to us all, and make it part of our everyday lives?
Yeah, it's a very interesting and also a very difficult question, because I think it points fingers to us all. And unfortunately, I always refer back, and it might be a little bit controversial, to the teleological argument, where instead of custodians, we've declared ourselves mini gods, and we completely took charge of nature in a patriarchal way. And for us to mend the reciprocal bond with nature, we actually have to let go of the superior stance. And that is where the opposing forces of continuity and change almost comes in, because we would very much like to continue on the path to success, or what we consider the path to success, which is actually now the path of destruction. And I think we presented now with a crisis unknown to us on a global scale ever before. But still, instead of turning to the green economy, etc., we just sort of going back the same old way, and not finding better, more sustainable. And I'm always hesitant to use the word sustainable, because what is really sustainable in this day and age, with the world being overpopulated and overexploited as is? But yes, we need to find a way to reconnect to nature, with nature basically, and to let go of our superior stance, and also the exploitative nature of capitalism. And we're fighting a hard battle. I'm not sure we will be able to get that right on a large scale, but we can start small with ourselves basically, and treat nature and its resources with a lot more of respect. So yeah.
Fantastic. I see that Charles Day has a question. Charles, if you're still there, you've raised your hand. You can unmute yourself and ask. Charles, are you there? Oh, hi, Charles. Can't hear you. We can see you.
Yeah, there's no connectivity there.
Okay, sorry, Charles.
Ian Cockrell has a question. Maybe we can unmute, ask to unmute. There we go.
Yeah, Isabel, thank you. Really interesting talk. You mentioned earlier on about how many years ago the elephants were nearly sort of wiped out in Botswana. I mean, today that the situation is reversed quite dramatically.
Absolutely.
And the previous regime, as you said, was very anti-hunting. The current regime is perhaps more open to hunting. What are you hearing on the ground from the people on the ground, the general people, the general Botswanan population? What's their views on hunting?
I think first and foremost, we must understand the vantage point, or where they're arguing from. I mean, if you live in isolation and you don't know, well, you're already confronted with this adverse climate conditions, and putting food on the table is a constant struggle. So if you do have a field of beans or millet, or whatever the case may be, and overnight there comes a troop of elephants and they just demolish everything, then you kind of look at them in a different way, and you, not in a good way, so to speak. So the confrontation is very real, and it's not born out of superstition or any kind of mysterious reason. It's based on survival, and there are fatal sort of conflicts between elephants and humans, where humans get trampled to death. And so if that is your reality, of course you will look at it differently. And the population size, and also the drivers of the concentration of elephants in that area, I think there's ongoing research about that. But I think we must also understand why maybe the previous regime was opposed to hunting, and why the new regime is maybe a little bit more open to it. Yes, and it's about investment in the tourism industry, opposed to maybe other motivators. But to get back to the original question, if you're a person that is confronted with a daily struggle of survival, then you won't look as kindly on elephants. And for us, well, tourists maybe traveling through the area, it's magnificent to see a huge lot of elephants. But yeah, it depends on your current situation. Yeah.
I see Marty's raised his hand. Always good for a question or two.
Thanks, Isabel, for a very interesting talk. I think the question I wanted to ask, and maybe I think to a larger extent, Botswana has, and specifically in Okavango, almost focused on a low impact, high value model, for want of a better word, where the amount of tourists that go there are very few, but they spend a lot of money in those sort of much more luxury resorts compared to the, let me call it the Kruger Park sort of model. Do you think that that model has actually helped the local people on the ground more than if it were a more spread out model? So I understand they're trying to limit impact on the environment, and that was a noble goal, I suppose, but has it actually worsened the effect on the people? From what I'm sort of seeing or hearing, it's those extremes as usual, where you've got the super rich and then the ultra poor.
Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, yeah, that is in theory the approach to tourism, the low volume, high impact. And also, like you've mentioned, it absolutely, well, most of the international the operators are international tourism operators in the first place. And also they tend to employ quite a limited number of people because they're treating a limited number of guests, if that is the case, with the lower volumes. But on the other side, that is just a high-end tourist, but there's a number of other groups of tourists that move through the area frequently and not as exclusively. So the impact is not really that limited. It's only the high-end establishments that is in exotic locations and difficult to access only via air or so on. But that doesn't limit the road users, for instance, the 4x4 visitors, etc. And like I said, it's benefiting, well, first and foremost the owners, and then a limited few individuals or a very elite group invested in the industry.
Is there any sort of sense of somehow including the local communities to benefit in that? Is there any structure? And I know it becomes a sensitive thing that people don't do anything and get money and it all goes to one person, the chief or something, and then it doesn't filter down. So is there like a model on the table, or?
Well, there's always intentions, and efforts to sort of develop a more open approach to that kind of activity. But during my research and also doing a rather thorough literature search, basically, I couldn't find a successful model of basically where they could operate a concession or whatever the case may be to their own benefit, and in the long run maintaining that model successfully. Unfortunately, it's not something that I came across. I may be wrong, but my research didn't show any successful model that is displaying the opposite.
Thanks.
Bridget, do you want to say something? Do you have a question?
I do, please. I want to ask about Recon Africa. We've been following it quite closely, and it seems that many local people see it as an opportunity for economic advancement.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to happen. The Namibian government only has a 10% stake in Recon Africa. What I want to know is, what can we effectively do to protest about it? And is there an international body, especially the people involved in climate change, who are closely monitoring and are anxious about it? Or is it not a cause of anxiety, is what I want to know.
Yeah, it's always a difficult thing, and it's tough to convince local people otherwise, because if you are confronted with extreme poverty and all of a sudden there's this shining light, basically, of hope and employment and improvement, etc., without realizing the long-term damaging effects that it's going to have on their complete livelihood, aside from maybe providing opportunities for employment and so on. That is a constant battle, and I think in South Africa we're seeing similar things, maybe just not on such a huge scale, or with a Mabola protected area, where there was also a mining concession, and now some of the properties that was previously protected is now just being declared unprotected for the sake of the mining to go ahead. And unfortunately, like I said, it's such a giant industry to battle, and I think the only tool basically is to make as much possible noise on social media, raise awareness as best as you can, and somewhere out there's going to be people that is much better equipped and geared towards fighting this kind of threat, because it's going to have, no matter how well they win address the whole effort, it's going to be devastating. I mean, it's going to be thirsty for water, and where's the water going to come from? And that is going to damage that whole system further downstream. So yeah, hopefully, I mean, there's protests. There's a guy walking from Knysna to Cape Town to raise awareness. And everybody, but there's a lot of speculation. So I honestly hope that we can soon deal with actual facts, so that we know how to best sort of fight the battle.
Thank you, Isabel. I would like to sort of ask if there's anybody who's part of the audience tonight who know the area, who have understanding, maybe opposite view, it doesn't matter. Maybe to share with us if you want to raise your hand.
Chris, if I may, maybe we can give Karen Ross. She had a point in the chat about an interesting point, but I think the Panhandle has a different scenario to tourism in the Delta. If I'm not mistaken, Karen is the author of Jewel of the Kalahari, which was prominent in some of the references in my MSc. Karen, would you want to elaborate on your statement?
Hello, everyone. I'd be glad to. Thank you. Lovely to join you. And thank you, Isabel, for such a great talk. Made me feel very homesick. Yeah, no, wonderful overview and of the Okavango and the Panhandle. And so interesting to hear about the anthropological side of things, which I'm not so experienced on. The point that I was making was simply that I think the tourism model in the Panhandle, which is a very confined area of the Delta, compared to the human density and human needs, is a bit different from the big Okavango Delta itself. That was my point. But the other thing that I think is very interesting is the point that has been brought up about Recon Africa. And, you know, I think that this is, you know, a very alarming development. And I just wanted to reassure everyone that from everything I've seen and heard, there is a very, very large international outcry. And the reason that there's not very much on the ground, it's mainly the exploration is actually taking place in Namibia, not Botswana. So it's really Namibia focused thing. And if people are interested, there's a group called Frack Free Namibia. You can join on Facebook. But there's a lot of concern, a lot of interest, and always a very delicate situation because, as you say, Isabel, people are looking at it as, for a start, a lot of the on-the-ground communities and Indigenous people really don't know very much about it at all. So the consultation hasn't been widespread on the local level, and also there's always that argument that you know, development and income and but obviously clearly if this ever went to fracking, it would be a disaster in this region. So I think there's lots of ways for people to be to get involved and stay informed. Thank you, and thank you for your great talk, and I hope you continue your work.
It's ongoing. Thank you very much, Karen.
Great, thank you. I'd like to be in touch. We'll stay in touch.
Absolutely, I will be in touch. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for your contribution, Karen. Much appreciated. Anybody who would like to contribute, whether you agree or disagree, welcome to do so. We're open, have an open discussion here. Any further questions? There's a hand. Hello, Linkmeyer.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Correct.
Yes, yes. Thank you for this very detailed, informative talk. Thank you so much, Isabel. It does, I realize it really takes a lot of in-depth information to understand the region altogether. I've had the luck to be there twice, once 30 years ago, when it was still quite, well, probably more primeval than now, and then not too long ago. And my question is actually a purely touristic one. How or where can one go along the river? What would be a good point to go from in a Mokoro, not a very high-end, expensive kind of touristic adventure, but meeting the people and really being in nature?
Oh, wow. I think Google is going to be your best friends. There's quite a number of Mokoro tour operators and Mokoro tours that you can do. In my experience, and like I say, I may be wrong, or somebody can actually give better information, but that is, it's a little bit easier to be on a Mokoro on the floodplain side of things, where the water isn't fast flowing or deep. So more to the northern side. I think that was the last Mokoro tour operators that I encountered, close to the Saronga area there. But I think if you Google, you should find a whole lot of operators that is actually advertising. Yeah, and I think no better way to actually experience it as from as close as being in a Mokoro. And they need, well, it requires a skilled handler to actually float to Mokoro. So yeah, no, it's special.
Very special, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Ella. Putting you on mute. Jasper raised his hand.
So yeah, just another sort of comment or something that I've heard, and maybe you know, but the number of Mokoro operators, etc., is having a massive impact on the trees that are used for making Mokoro boats. I think it's a jackalberry, and obviously it needs to be of a specific size, etc., and it's having a huge impact on the indigenous flora. Sorry.
Yes. Yes, they are trying their best to switch to fiberglass Mokoros, basically on the same model, if I can call it like that, to reduce the impact on cutting down that indigenous trees and so on. So there's definitely a movement towards something that is more sustainable. Yeah, and I think, was it Helga that previously asked a question?
Yeah.
I think on the Namibian side, I just remember in Gepi, I think is also doing Mokoro tours. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Yeah. Ruan, just check for us for questions in the chat. I'm just going through the names to see if there's any hands raised.
No questions that we if Andy Klee is still on, then maybe he can elaborate on his statement if he wants to.
I see Andy. I'll ask you to unmute. There we go.
Africa.
It was the Recon Africa thing. I know, the world seems to be changing when it comes to people being willing to back and support oil exploration. It looks like, I'm no expert on this field, but just sort of follow these sorts of issues. And yeah, I mean, I can't remember which, I think it's a park in Alaska there, Trump and his gang had issued drilling licenses or exploration licenses, and none of the banks would back an oil company to go and do it. So I think the world's changing, whether it's a Western indulgence at the moment, as we're becoming increasingly concerned about these things, and these companies are still trying in the wilds of Africa where perhaps they're not under such public eye. But I think there's hope that the world's changing. I mean, there's papers out suggesting peak oil was last year, with COVID putting the hammer down on consumption and all that. So there's hope. It's just getting in there quick. And fracking, thank God we banned it in the UK, because it's not doing anybody good at all from wherever it is. So that's it. That's pretty much all I can say. I think the UN Environment Programme and those guys in Geneva keep an eye on this sort of stuff, and they're pretty good for monitoring and looking at that sort of top level strategic on a global scale and what's happening internationally with rules and regs. And yes, I just had a quick Google to see who Recon Africa are, and Leonardo DiCaprio is on the bandwagon. So, Hollywood's getting its guns blazing as well. So I think all that sort of stuff can put pressure on people, and you can pressure the investors. I think that's what helps to stop these things, because the guys in country and all that, there's too much money changing hands and to be made there to sway it there. But if you can pull the rug financially, maybe we can stop this. Sorry, that's all I can add, but a different take.
Thank you, Andy. Thanks for your contribution. Appreciate. I'm seeing Robin Brown, if he wants to add anything. Gerard de Jager, just going through names that I think might want to make some comments. Robin, you unmuted.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Isabel, thank you so much for a lovely talk. Apart from anything else, I mean, it was very interesting, but always just so beautiful to see pictures of the amazing area and also the people there. My question is to ask you about those fences, those historical fences. And there was some talk, the recent deaths with elephant, in some of those areas on the right-hand side of the Panhandle, obviously if you're looking down at the map, but that those elephants were restricted to an area because of those fences. Is there some talk about possibly those fences now being removed because they're not really doing any good?
Oh, the fences were controversial right from the start. I mean, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the massive impact it had in the beginning. Just with the normal migration of wildebeest, etc. They were used to following the migration path towards the water, and all of a sudden there was this fence. So the fatalities were absolutely massive. With regards, and I mean, that is why it's easy to say it's free from anthropogenic influence, but I mean, fences are, it's so restricting, and especially then either keeping things out or keeping things in, or animals for that matter. I was reading up on the specific population dynamics and movements, and how they're actually trying to understand the movements in and out of the Delta region, etc. Also in relation to the Casa Transfrontier park. So I think the research is ongoing, but whether the fences is ever going to be removed, I strongly doubt it, because I think there were so many arguments against it and motivations to have it removed. But well, to the best of my knowledge, it's not happening. I'm not sure whether the elephant problem is actually going to be then the cause for some of the fences to be taken down. But also, I mean, I've seen fences demolished by elephants. So I'm not so sure that that kind of fence is actually effective in keeping elephants in. Well, I'll have to read up on it a little bit more. But in my experience, very little is stopping them if they really want to move around. Yeah, but the concentration is a massive problem.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. That's a very interesting response. I appreciate that, and I've also heard that there's mixed feelings on those fences, whether to remove them or not. I think the large bulls can easily get over a lot of those fences, but it's the breeding herds and the younger animals that have a problem with them, and that's where the restrictions are. Thanks very much.
My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for a lovely chat.
Thanks, Robin.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Gerard, if you wanted to say something, I was wondering if Colin would like to make any comments.
We've got Karen. Karen's got her hand up, so I'm going to unmute Karen, see if she wants to say something. Karen, go ahead. Oh, maybe she stepped away. Oh, no, you're there. Hi, go ahead.
Hi. No, sorry, I had to jump in here because fences is one of the topics that I've been passionately involved in for decades that I've been working in the Okavango region. And I've seen really a lot of very bad destruction caused by them, as alluded to by Isabel and the other speakers. Most of these fences originally went up to quarantine cattle from wildlife as part of a foot and mouth control program, disease control program. And this was to allow the export of beef to the European Union. And what made some of these fences, particularly along the Caprivi border, and also some of them along the Panhandle area, one of them is called the Northern Butler fence, but the border fences in particular, they're double fences, electrified, 4 meters tall with steel cables. So, some of them are pretty immovable, even by elephants. And some of them have been responsible for that concentration of elephants around the Panhandle. There's a very good NGO called EcoExist who's working in the area, in the Panhandle, that are working on it. And I've been working with a group from Cornell University called AHEAD. And a couple of years ago, we were involved with working with the Botswana government to get the Botswana Fences Committee reconvened, which it has been. And this committee is designed to sit down and talk about fences and which of them are no longer serving a purpose and which of them really are being quite destructive to wildlife and should be removed. But because it's tied up with the beef industry and the beef export industry, it's a very sort of complicated and delicate topic. So that's just what I wanted to add.
Thanks, Karen. We could maybe at a point try and get EcoExist to do a talk. Dinky, please make a note of that.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, I think so. We could do that. Alistair, did you raise your hand and then drop it? I see Andy is also Alistair. Unmuting you, and then Andy Holman after that.
Hi, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Isabel, for a great talk. I've got a couple of comments just from the questions that have come out. I think a general comment that I looked at in terms of my master's when I was doing it is sustainability is a forever changing task. I mean, how do we classify what sustainability is? Sustainability today versus sustainability in 10 years' time is going to be a completely different picture. With regards to the elephant conversation and the fencing thing, from a Kruger National Park perspective and a national parks perspective in South Africa, we've seen that fences don't generally govern elephant movement, but water does. And I think the Panhandle is going to be subject to some significant water impacts, as far as the elephants aren't going to move into the drier areas, even if you remove the fencing situation. So I think the elephant issue is going to be a big challenge going forward, and I think that there is governance that has influenced it. I also think that although COVID has benefited wildlife conservation as a whole in terms of the environment, I think that the prolonged African lockdowns that we're starting to see are serving political interests and political desires rather than the best interest of the populations. And that is going to push us down a road that is in favor of mining, etc., etc. We've got to get our tourism industries open, and that's going to come with political desire. And currently, the regime seems to be the regimes in Africa seem to be into immediate cash injections rather than a sustainable cash injection into their economies. But thanks for a great talk.
Thank you so much. Yeah, valuable comments. Thanks.
Andy? Sorry, I just muted you. My mistake. Sorry. Paul, you take over.
Thanks for the talk. So I was in Botswana camping for 10 days 2 years ago, and I was on the eastern side. we tried to follow the zebra migration, and I thought there was a precedence then for fence removal because the zebra migration had been stopped for years, and it was started again when they did remove some fences somewhere in Botswana. That was my understanding, at least, with that.
Okay. Wonderful.
Yeah, if anybody else knows about that. So that maybe would be a precedence for other kinds of fence removals as far as other things. I found the camping experience, which was just a few of us with two Botswanan guides, not the lodge, was really an excellent experience and seemed to be benefiting communities. But of course, that's just one experience. But they still were talking about their community councils and things like that, rather than being a lodge where it's a whole different kind of experience.
Yes.
Thanks, Andy. Any other comments? Just from my side, Isabel, when I look at these, the complexity of the situation, it sometimes leaves you with, on the one side, with uncertainty and fear, and sometimes you say, well, where's the solutions? Where are they? And specifically the Botswana Delta area it's very confusing situation. And one look at the various, you can start from mining to tourism, and then look at the local population. It baffles me. I just don't think there's single easy answers to it all. It's a very complex situation, and we have to think at all levels in a diverse way. But my hats off to you for having done this work and also raising your voice. That's important.